What is Steven Spielberg's net worth? The richest producer in the world. Stay tuned and learn more about the lives of rich people. Hello dear friends, Steven Spielberg is an American director, screenwriter and producer with a fortune of $8 billion and an annual income of $150 million. At the time of this video, Steven's $8 billion fortune made him the second richest celebrity on the planet, after good buddy and fellow director-producer George Lucas, whose fortune is $10 billion. Steven Spielberg's name is synonymous with cinema, and his career spans more than 4 decades. Some of his most famous films include Jaws, Third Degree Close Encounters, Indiana Jones. Frankly, even the list of hits is too long for a brief description. Income and salary. For his own films, Steven often chooses a relatively low initial salary, $10 million, in exchange for additional grossing points. One such deal with 1993's Jurassic Park resulted in a $250 million payout for Steven. That's the same as about $360 million in today's dollars. He made at least $150 million on the sequel and $75 million on the third part, which he didn't even direct. He has been known to refuse to accept a paycheck for Schindler's List, calling any money earned blood money. Instead, he funneled all of the proceeds owed to him in perpetuity to fund the USC Sloan Foundation in 1994, which honors and remembers Holocaust survivors. Universal Parks Comcast deal. Steven was able to negotiate what would eventually become hundreds of millions of dollars for Jurassic Park, thanks to a particularly generous deal struck in 1993 with the Universal Pictures Film Studio. In fact, the deal was with MCA, Universal's parent company. In the early 1990s, MCA was on the verge of bankruptcy, and Spielberg's contract needed to be renewed. Warner Brothers made a generous offer that was almost impossible to match in monetary terms, so MCA had to get creative. In the end, Spielberg successfully negotiated a deal that entitled him to 2% of all gross ticket sales at Universal Park annually in perpetuity. Details of this arrangement came to light decades later during a legal battle between DreamWorks and Disney in 2009. Court documents showed that Steven lent DreamWorks $15 million to help the studio stay afloat. A footnote to the lawsuit details that Spielberg's deal with 2% of Universal in recent years was $30 million a year. The payments are called consulting fees. Fast forward to 2015. By that point, Universal was owned by Comcast, a publicly traded company. Also, by that point, Universal operated several theme parks around the world, each of which paid Steven a share of ticket sales. A part of a securities filing regarding business risks and upcoming expenses, Comcast was forced to disclose that it might owe Spielberg up to $535 million in 2017 because of a buyout clause in the contract. When 2017 came around, Spielberg did not activate the buyout clause. Instead, Comcast and Spielberg agreed to a new deal in which Comcast acquired a stake in his movie studio, Amblin Partners, in a deal that could eventually bring in more than $1 billion. Betting on Star Wars. Back in the late 1970s, during the creation of what would later become Star Wars, writer, director and creator George Lucas was convinced that his passionate project would become a huge bomb. At the same time, Spielberg was feeling what would later become Close Encounters in the Third Degree. In a moment of particular weakness and desperation, Lucas asked Spielberg if he would trade points for their respective films. As Spielberg later recounted, he said, "Do you want to trade some points? I'll give you 2.5% of Star Wars if you give me 2.5% of Close Encounters." I said, "Sure, I'll take my chances with that." Great. Spielberg agreed. And while Close Encounters was a big success, earning over $300 million worldwide, Star Wars eventually made billions. In the process, Steven made and still makes a small fortune on a movie he had nothing to do with. Early career. His career only began when he worked at Universal Studios as an unpaid intern in the editing department. It was during this time that Spielberg directed the 24-minute short film Amblin, the name he would eventually go on to use at his production company, which caught the attention of Sidney Sheinberg, who was vice president of production at Universal Television. Spielberg became the youngest director ever to sign a long-term contract with a major studio. He dropped out of college because of the opportunity, but later returned in 2002 to pursue a bachelor's degree in film and electronic arts, as if he needed credentials to validate field experience. During his time as a television director, he directed episodes of Rod Sterling's The Night Gallery, Columbo, and Marcus Welby's MD. These ventures were so successful that he was signed on to make 4 films for television. The first of these was the 1971 classic Duel. Duel was such a success that he was offered a job directing a theatrical feature film, Sugar Land Express. The film was met with many positive reviews. Success. It wasn't until 1975 that Spielberg's career skyrocketed thanks to the success of Jaws. In 1975, Jaws became the first true blockbuster after being seen by over 67% of Americans. At the time, he declined offers to direct Jaws 2, King Kong and Superman. Instead, Steven followed up Jaws with Close Encounters in the Third Degree, starring Richard Dreyfuss, whom Spielberg considers his alter ego. In 1981, he teamed up with longtime friend and fellow director George Lucas to make Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first installment in the Indiana Jones series, an even bigger hit. A year later, Spielberg returned to the science fiction genre when he made Alien, about a little boy and the friendly alien he befriends. E.T. became the highest-grossing film of all time and was nominated for 9 Academy Awards. Between 1982 and 1985, Spielberg directed 3 incredibly box office and acclaimed films: Poltergeist. He also co-wrote the screenplay, The Twilight Zone, and The Goonies, for which he also wrote the story on which the script was based and executive produced the film. Spielberg then directed the Raiders prequel, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, again teaming up with George Lucas and Harrison Ford. This film, along with the Spielberg-produced Gremlins, led to a PG-13 rating. The film was a huge blockbuster of 1984. In 1985, Spielberg released an adaptation of Alice Walker's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel The Color Purple, starring Whoopi Goldberg and Oprah Winfrey. The film helped Spielberg to break into the drama genre. Roger Ebert declared it the best film of the year and then added it to his archive of great films. The film was nominated for 11 Oscars. In 1987, Spielberg made Empire of the Sun, the first American film in Shanghai since 1930s. It didn't bring in significant box office receipts though. After 2 forays into more serious dramatic films, Spielberg then directed a third Indiana Jones film, 1989's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Steven's career went on to produce bigger hits such as 1991's Hook, starring Robin Williams, AI Artificial Intelligence, and Jurassic Park, a legendary film that needs no introduction or explanation. He was also the executive producer of the entire Man in Black franchise. He continued his dramatic work throughout the 2010s, starring in such films as Warehouse, Spy Bridge, Lincoln, and The Post. In addition to box office receipts, he also received critical acclaim and awards. Spielberg has won 3 Academy Awards, 2 of them for directing Schindler's List in 1993 and Saving Private Ryan in 1998, both of which are constantly on lists of the greatest films of all time, and one of the best films, Schindler's List. His films have consistently been nominated for Best Film and Best Directing. In addition to his extensive and brilliant film career, Spielberg has had a long career in video game production, collaborating, directing, designing, and writing screenplays. Steven Spielberg continues to shoot, direct, produce, and breathe films. Real estate. Steven and Kate own at least $200 million worth of real estate. For years, they have owned a 1.4-acre plot on Malibu's most coveted shoreline. The first of the lots, which became their most recent property, they bought back in 1989 for $3,375,000. In 2002, they expanded their presence by buying the property next door for $3.2 million. In 2015, they sold the 150-foot Ocean View property for $26 million. Their longtime primary residence, which they still own, is an incredible 5-acre apartment complex in Pacific Palisades. They also have an equestrian complex not far from their home. On the East Coast, They own a 6,000 square foot New York apartment that has a direct view of West Central Park. In East Hampton, they have a 10-acre estate, part oceanfront and part cove. Spielberg's compound covers 7.5 acres. In 2013, a woman named Courtney Rose put the 5.5-acre property up for sale for $75 million. Courtney is the widow of Steve Ross, former chairman of Warner Communications and longtime mentor to Steven Spielberg. Spielberg later described Rose as very much what I wish my father had been. Schindler's List is dedicated to Steve Ross. Courtney sold her property for $50 million after a year on the market, perhaps not coincidentally to Spielberg's DreamWorks co-founder David Geffen. 2 years later, Geffen sold the estate for $67 million. Again, the Spielberg Capshaw property is at least 2 acres larger than the former Rose Geffen property. The Spielbergs own several other properties in the Hamptons and a home in Naples, Florida. Steven has also financed several homes for his children in Los Angeles. Hobbies. Spielberg is an avid rowing enthusiast. In 2013, he bought a mega yacht, 282 feet, called Seven Seas. He paid $182 million for her. He later put it up for sale and bought a new 300-foot yacht which cost him a whopping $250 million. He's also, if you can believe it, a collector of memorabilia from old movies. He has brag-worthy trinkets such as a balsa rosebud sleeve from the Citizen Kane set and his own director's copy of Orson Welles' 1938 script for War of the Worlds. He buys Oscar statuettes, such as the awards Bette Davis won in the 30s, for sale on the open market and donates them to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to preserve them and prevent commercial exploitation. Spielberg also owns many works by American artist Norman Rockwell. His own personal collection of 57 Rockwell paintings, along with his own works by fellow collector George Lucas, was on display at the Smithsonian Institution in an exhibition called Telling Stories from July 2 to January 2, 2011. Although we can't imagine where he finds time, Spielberg is also a movie buff who watches several movies every weekend. Have you seen any of his movies?